mean, Elvia is Benny's best friend who runs a small bookstore in fact, where is all this set? We haven't even mentioned that.
Well, the town is called San Celina, but it's based on San Luis Obispo, which is on the central coast of California, about 2 hours north of Santa Barbara.
And you don't live there?
No, I don't. I live in Orange County, about 5 hours south of there. But my sister lived up there for 8 years, and I used to go visit her all the time, and I fell in love with the area. Unfortunately, well, not unfortunately, fortunately my husband's job supports me, but unfortunately his job is down in Orange County and is not transferable up to the Central Coast. So I write about that area because I love it and wish I could live there, so instead I get to travel there all the time.
You've picked a really interesting part of California too. It's quite large and it has remarkable contrasts. We were talking the other night about, you know, you've got coastal California, which you have dealt with particularly well, I think, in Mariner's Compass, which takes place in what, Morro Bay?
Morro Bay, right.
And so it is, to some degree, and it's a treasure hunt story, it's an on-the-road story, but you've also got this kind of nautical thing in that one of the characters was a sailor, right?
Right.
Lives in a...
well, is a wood carver, and he lives in this house and
right.
is very interested in the sea. And
so that's very much a seacoast, you know, kind of thing. Although you do go off into the interior, she's chasing down the various clues that will lead to the resolution of the mystery. I really enjoyed your whole sort of sidebar about Jimmy Dean and, you know, where he died out there.
Most people don't realize that he was killed out there in San Luis Obispo County.
Right, but not along the coast, right?
No, more inland, on the road to Bakersfield, actually.
Right, so you actually, in that book, go all the way from Morro Bay to Bakersfield, and you're able to do a lot of county history and, you know, reasonably current county history and so forth in that book. But you are dealing with there are all kinds of cultures within that county. For example, in Seven Sisters, you've got an old ranch, a family ranch, 4 generations, in fact, because you've got your oldest character is in her 90s,
right,
still alive.
95, yeah.
So you've got 2 that are nonagenarians, and then you've got this generational family, and they have ranch property, and part of the family is interested in quarter horses, and, you know, keeping that whole industry, if you will, alive. And the other part has moved into viniculture and is very much engaged in that whole California wine thing. And they're clashing because, as it turns out, they don't meet.
Right, and because it doesn't. The growing wine grapes and raising either cattle or horses or just leaving the land the way it is, they don't and you know, agree with each other. And up in that county, that is a big problem right now. A lot of the stuff I take is stuff that is actually happening up in San Luis County. It's really a county that's in transition. And anytime you have something that's in transition, or you have really varied groups of people in it, is the perfect place to set murder mysteries, because there's all these reasons people want to kill each other. Up there you have the environmentalists, you have the oil workers, because you have a lot of like Union Oil, Texaco, you know, Standard Oil, you have all of them up there. You have the college, Cal Poly, so you have a whole college atmosphere up there. In Northern County, you have still the ranchers that have been there for 100 years. And that now you're getting a huge retirement community moving in, which is causing a lot of stress, because it's people from Northern California and Southern California coming in, buying up all the houses and land, and making it hard for the people who live there.
In fact, isn't something happening in Paso Robles?
Yes, actually, I just read this. It was sort of interesting. The Judith Krantz has sold her house in Newport Beach, $10 million house, or $5 million, and she's moving up to Paso Robles and going to build a house. So
unspoiled Paso Robles.
Yeah, which is sort of funny when you think about what the kind of books that Judith Krantz writes. And Paso Robles is getting much more gentrified now, but originally Paso Robles was very much cattle, horse country. I mean, the type where you would go into a local restaurant and you'd still see cowboys walking in with spurs and manure on their boots, and but it's now, so you're going to end up having a clash, I think, which you do politically. In the politics up there are just fascinating.
I imagine you get the radical right and the radical left.
That's exactly what you have.
But you know, that's happening all over the West. I mean, it is a very western part of California. It's the same thing going on in Montana, here in Arizona, et cetera. You've got what used to be a ranching or agricultural economic base, and, you know, plentiful land, and it was relatively cheap and so forth. And then all of a sudden you've got all these people who are urban and moneyed, and either retired or, you know, maybe they're in computers or something. It doesn't matter where they live in order to make an income, and they like it. It's unspoiled and it's affordable, et cetera. And so they move in, and then bam, you know.
All the things that you moved in for, all of a sudden, well, not all of a sudden, but gradually become changed. And before you know it, the town is no longer, or the county is no longer the county that you originally moved in.
This is true.
Happened to Santa Barbara.
Definitely so. And I think I was trying to think, Thomas Siegel has written a couple of books, maybe 3, about Aspen, a community that was, you know, very much just a Colorado mountain town with an agricultural base, and then became a huge ski resort. One of my husband's cousins, in fact, is the developer, or great uncle or something, can't remember which part of the clan it comes from, is the Aspen developer. And all of a sudden, people who lived in Aspen for generations and had land there and were part of, maybe it was also part of a mining economy, can't afford to live in Aspen anymore. Happened very much in Santa Fe, that, you know, that people who live there. So you get this huge resentment of native population, so to speak, who suddenly, because of the gentrification, can no longer afford to live in. And I'm sure that's going to happen to you more and more in San Luis, you know, in your county that you're writing about.
And see, as a writer, for me, with the type of books I write, that's wonderful, because I have all of this great, but for the people up there, it's not. And it would, you know, it's sort of sad in a way, because the thing that initially attracted me to it, of course, 10 years ago, or 15 years ago when I was visiting my sister, was this sort of rural, you know, area that not very many people knew about. As a matter of fact, when I first wrote Fool's Puzzle and I sent it back east in New York, most people had never even heard of San Luis Obispo. They knew about Santa Barbara, they knew Orange County, you know, LA area, they knew San Francisco, and they said, is there anything in between? You know, and there, I mean, there's a whole county of people in between, which they were happy to be, you know, silent and quiet and unknown for a long time, but that's changing.
Well, it's been a fun part of your series, is that you've had a chance to explore, you know, this whole county historically, economically, geographically, et cetera. You've got the politics, and I thought, particularly in Seven Sisters, you'd obviously had a rip-roaring good time looking at the wine industry and the quarter horse industry.
Oh yeah, the wine industry, that was a real education for me, because I don't particularly like wine. So, you know, it was, I don't like anything. I'm like Benny in the book. She talks about how she doesn't like anything grape, and I don't either. But luckily I have a friend up there who loves wine, so her and I went up there, and one weekend we saw 12 wineries, and I was the driver and she was the passenger, and she had a great time, you know, and I got a lot of information going around. As a matter of fact, one of the wineries, it was pretty amazing that one of the employees, when he heard what I was doing, he gave me this great tour and told me a myriad of ways to kill a person in a winery. Now in my book, I just use a plain old gun, but there's apparently lots of really interesting ways you could kill a person in a winery just using the stuff you have at hand.
Oh, absolutely.
Which I'm not quite sure how come he knew all of this. Sort of worried me. But,
well, I mean, I've often thought a wine industry series would be fun, although I suspect it would be too circumscribed. But the Maxwells wrote, and I can't remember the title, but Ann and Evan wrote a really good book set in wine country, although I think it was up in Napa, in which the wine, the grapes themselves became, or something to do with the fermenting process became part of the reason that somebody died. I mean, you can drown people in vats, or you can poison them, or, you know, I mean, it's always interesting to talk that nexus between what you eat and drink and the fact that it can kill you is very interesting for
great
writers.
Metaphor there.
Yeah, it always has
Wine
been.
will kill you. Yeah, well, in some ways, I guess.
But what you also talk about is the economics of the wine industry, and it's interesting that what used to be the homegrown local family boutique wineries are disappearing in California too, aren't they?
Right, that's one thing I learned about it, not knowing anything about the industry. I went in just trying to find out the surface stuff about, I mean, what I knew about wine was there was red and there was white, and that was about what I knew. But once I got in and started learning more about the wineries, what amazed me is, again, it's a place where the big corporations are coming in and moving in on something that was once a mom and pop, you know, family deal. And one of the biggest wineries in San Luis Obispo County now is owned by the Australians.
Right,
and,
so you're getting foreign capital
right,
in too.
which is even scarier. We're not even talking about big American-owned, you know, co-ops. We're talking about foreign-owned ones. And, you know, makes you feel bad for the small wineries, the family wineries. Some of those wineries have been there for, you know, 75, 80 years.
Sure.
And they're getting pushed out. And so, again, there's the conflict there that happens. Anytime you have a beautiful area, I think, eventually people are going to discover